So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this is again the first battle that I'm going to be recording after returning from a rather lengthy trip away for work, so hopefully my skills have not faded too much and we'll be able to get back into a large siege battle here, which this is MISTRAND, a map that we have seen in the past, and while it is mostly classed as a siege, it's one of those cityscape battles where it's largely street-to-street fighting, and the defenders will have to pick a suitable place within the settlement rather than defending the outside of it in order to be successful. I believe it is going to be good versus evil as well, the forces of evil hoping to reclaim their land, I suppose, now that the forces of good have taken this place from them. It's a rather large and sprawling map, but it is certainly this half of the settlement we're looking at now where the defenders do have a tendency to make their stand, because there's more of a natural progression of falling back. The deployment zones being what they are as well means it's not really terribly viable for the defenders to try and fight through attacking armies to try and get what they want. Either way though, we'll go through the attackers first and foremost, starting off with this army over here, which is going to be Canned, played by Leech. Canned, of course, they've got some very good infantry, which is good given the state of cavalry in the current version of the game. I'm sure that when the cavalry rework comes, Canned may very well end up being one of the best all-round factions, because I imagine that infantry isn't going to get gutted. So the Nirad footmen are a very good choice. There are going to be some Western Kingdoms of men on the defence today, and the armour piercing on these rank and file line infantry units that Canned have. Very, very useful, and of course when you're on the attack you're going to be taking a lot of arrow fire, a lot of damage at range over a sustained period throughout the battle, but the Nirad footmen have got those large rectangular wicker shields which provide a decent amount of cover for them, so they're a little bit more difficult to scythe through like that. Nomadic Raiders, I imagine the attackers wholesale are going to be going in a little bit more for the cheaper archers. They're very easy to use, this kind of archer, when you've got a numbers advantage on the attack, because all you need them to do is shoot something. Either they will get some attention in return, in which case the enemy are using their arrows on something which they would rather not, or they get kills. So that's something that the defenders have always got to try and weigh up the costs of approaching them in a different way. Nomadic Marauders, basic javelins, again very good for the same reasons, albeit they are more likely to deal damage quickly, which can be the difference between a line holding and breaking. Some upgraded Nomadic Warriors. For a unit of basic heavy swordsmen, they're not too bad, but compared to a lot of the other two-hander sword units in the game, they are going to come out second best. Brotherhood units are of course largely the cream of the crop that can field. Several of them are quite defensive in nature, like the sword and the spear units. You can see the spear units are most certainly here. The axe unit is here as well. Yes, they are. Obviously much more aggressive. Plenty of Nirad halberds as well, which act as a nice foil for the more defensive units of line infantry in front of them. More armor piercing, of course, is always going to be useful as well. More Marauders, and the Storm Guard here at the back, which this is the singular strongest infantry unit that can field. Very, very powerful. Kind of a weird unit as well, because they're technically pole arms, but they don't have access to the phalanx formation, so it's a little bit of a weird one. But they do seem to still perform very, very well without being completely overpowered, so that's good. Now we have Baconfish 302 playing as Harad. Harad have got largely some crossover with Canned in the sense they've got a lot of armor piercing, not in the Haradrim Spearmen of course, but Muhard units. They are less durable than Canned overall. Obviously lots of these Muhard units are going to be very vulnerable to the arrow fire that I mentioned the Nirads being decent against. Haradrim archers here as well, but I would say that Harad have got higher damage dealing potential than Canned in this kind of situation. The Demons of the Desert are one such example, but the Trollmen, which I'm sure are around here somewhere, the basic javelins, even dismounted Serpent Guard, are a little bit more offense focused as well than a lot of the Candish infantry. Yeah, and Trollmen are over here, and the Champions of Nathrat, which of course are the bodyguard variant, so plenty of armor piercing, which will be useful for the same reasons I've already mentioned. Now then, we move on to Umbar, played by Ellipsis, another evil men faction. This Umbar, in contrast to the two factions we've already seen, are certainly more about a quality focus than anything else. Naru and Erebor Guard are very heavy archers. They're going to find themselves very much at home in this kind of situation, skirmishing back and forth between themselves and their opponents. Balagai archers, we've got some Ardenheim Shield Guard as well. Interesting to see the Warlords of Umbar, not a terrible choice on a map like this, because the settlement is so large that cavalry could actually prove to be quite useful. There is a window on that though. If you wait until the final stand, chances are if the cavalry actually gets kills it's because the enemy are being overwhelmed anyway. Or, of course, the lines remain strong and the cavalry can't really be used effectively. We'll see. Alcarondas Legion, 4 of them. more heavy axemen in the Balakith Axe Guard, and more javelins as well in the Corsair Blackguards. So yeah, plenty of armor piercing that the attackers are going to be bringing to the table. Now for the 4th army, which is over here, our first Orcish faction on display, played by Medexa, it's going to be Mordor. We've got plenty of Morannon units, Morannon Guard, infantry are in there I'm sure, Maulers, so a numerous army this. You can see the Olak-hai towering above the lowly orcs that are all around them. Minas Morgul chosen here at the front. There are some temple units in there as well. Temple Guard, armor piercing arrows can be very useful. Great shield infantry we've seen used to great effect time and again. Blackguard of Barad-dûr will be hoping that they can be used at the right time. Orc javelins as well, and then in the distance another Evil Men faction. You can see them from a mile off in their golden armour. Rhun, played by Sanket. He's got some Loci on Rim, another unit of heavier spears. More armour piercing of course in the runic faction as well, so they've got access to a lot of that, the attackers today. Eastron Warriors, Carmen's Chosen. Interesting to see the Eastron Guard actually in their gold armour. They're a scarcely seen unit because generally speaking they're not really good enough in melee to make up for the fact that they're going to get shot up at range pretty badly, but it's still neat to see them. Loknar Rim, Variag Mercenaries, plenty of archers here, Flag Rim of course with that armor piercing, 2 more units of them, and then some Balkoth tribesmen as well. So, moving on to the defenders, starting off with Gondor, played by Winged Swordsman 44, who sent me this battle replay, so a big thank you to him. Got a Trebuchet, which, artillery on the defence, can be devastating. It's always a bit of a roll of the dice, but you have to fancy your chances when you're on the defence, purely because the attackers have to move kind of where you funnel them, and so artillery can be so brutal. With Thrandir's Rescue, you actually do need to be careful because they will lose in a straight fight with something like the Warlords of Umbar, but potentially they have a good opportunity to land some early blows on Rhun and Mordor. Nimlothian Honour Guard and Standard Fountain Guard, there's also Guards of Osgiliath in there that I can see more from the pikes sticking out more so than the actual men holding them. March from Caer Andros, Pelagian Marines, more Gondorian archers, plenty of armour upgrades all around here as well. Veterans of Osgiliath will be quite good. The Athelian Rangers and Wards of Minas Ithil are in there. Gondor have got access to a wide variety of archers. Most of them are more defensive in nature, but the Athelian Rangers and Wards of Minas Ithil are the exceptions to that, and they will need it to be used ideally if the defenders are to be victorious. Darthy Darth playing as Erebor, so once again all that armour piercing the attacks are brought is certainly not going to be for nothing with Gondor and the dwarves on the field, but Ironfoot Warriors, Ironfoot Spears, plenty of very strong line holding units, and then damage dealers in the Axe Guard of Erebor. Erebor Legionaries are a higher tier line of unit as well. When it comes to quality and holding the line, the dwarves are certainly the masters at that. All of the bodyguard units are on display as well, which is not surprising in a 5v3 like this. Dragon Slayers armour piercing, Highborns of Erebor the most tanky with a shield, Obsidian Guard the most tanky in melee because of their dual wielding, and then the armour piercing really cranked up to 11 on the Sons of Durin. Then we have some Ironfoot Axe Throwers, crossbows as well. So obviously Erebor don't have access to archers, but they've got crossbows and axe throwers, so they're going to have a different ranged focus than their Gondorian allies today, but plenty of punch on them. And again, using your ammunition wisely really is the key to victory most of the time. And finally, Hertumihai, who's going to be playing as Lindon, in stark contrast to the heavily armoured legions they're going to be digging in alongside today. Lindon, very much a lightly armoured faction, but perhaps a little bit more finesse is exactly what's called for here, spreading out your strengths as a team a little bit. Mithlon pikemen are going to be good at holding a line, as are the 4 Lindon pikes. Obviously Lindon, most people would suggest that Imladris and Lothlorien have got the better pikes, which they do, but Lindon can field pikes in higher numbers than any other elven faction, which is a strength all of its own, and that could be useful here. Mithlon Marines, all sorts of Ulmo as well. I mean, as far as a cavalry duel goes, the Horse Lords should be fine against the Warlords of Umbar. Not quite as sure about that as I once was, but we'll see. Noldorin Guard, a couple of them, Noldorin Blade Masters, plenty of javelins as well, so again another different focus. Lindon a little bit more javelin heavy than certainly Erebor and Gondor. I imagine as well there's probably going to be Wardens of Elos Tyrian in here as well, because you'd have to be mad not to bring them, given the situation with body-piercing projectiles. Now then, I don't know if there's going to be a lengthy cut or not. It kind of depends on what Gondor want to do, because they're at the back of the settlement, they've got a long way to travel, but we'll see. It's not an overly long battle, so I don't actually think there'll be a huge cut involved, but we'll wait and see. We'll rejoin when the battle is about to get underway. A surprisingly long grace period really, but Gondor have elected to take the more defensive route, which is probably wise, and they have got their army around the back of the settlement and have now linked up with the Dwarven and Elven defenders as part of this effort. and now they're going to be trading back and forth with the Harad archers. But standard Gondor archers are actually going to prove to be a very useful thing for dealing with these archers. Even better though is going to be this cavalry, because it means that ammunition can be saved for later, and doubtless Harad archers will be mown down like grass by heavy cavalry of any description, especially lance knights such as the horse lords. They do need to be a little bit careful though, the horse lords, because if they do go too far into the ranks of the enemy, then they will start to encounter stuff like trolls, and even basic spears are not where you want such an expensive unit to be wasting too much of their efforts. Over here, Canned, a little bit less eager to get involved just yet, but then it's harder for them to skirmish if they go here. The dwarves will simply lurch forward with their infantry and catch out any archers that may want to try skirmishing. So I think Canned are actually going to be waiting until the forces of Rhun, who have been the ones to go around the back end of the settlement, to get over there as well. Mordor, Umbar and Harad are all over here to a certain extent. I don't know if anyone has sent a little bit of help to Rhun to go around the back of the settlement as well, but it would make a little bit of sense to give some help to Rhun and Canned as well. Spread your assets out a little bit more so. Otherwise, while this is the best area to attack because it's wide and flat for the attackers, I do feel as though if you put too many eggs into this basket, then the defenders can front load on their defence, and especially where the dwarves are concerned, if they can set up a good front line, it's going to be very difficult for the attackers to gain momentum quickly in this fight. The advantage always rests with the attackers in a 5v3, but the defenders will take any bit of good news they can get, I'm sure. Further down the hill, it is looking like an entirely runic effort, this. Plenty of gold armour on display. There's some Scion Rim over there. There is, I believe, a way... Well, actually, no, there isn't. I thought there was a way up into the hills over here. I don't think there is, actually. So Rhun doesn't really need to be guarding their flanks in such a fashion. Orc fodder right in front of the defensive lines of the Ironfoots and the Elves from the west. Doubtless the Orc fodder will not be moving in until a genuine assault is actually planned for. Artillery being utilised is an interesting one, trying to bank their shots. I mean, 2 misses, but I have to say there are quite a few units that are worthwhile to go after back here. Alcarondas Legion, Minas Morgul Chosen, as long as you can actually hit them, it would prove to be a good choice. But if you can't, such as was just demonstrated, I think conserving that artillery ammunition is going to be more useful, especially seeing as the attackers don't actually have artillery of their own, so you don't need to worry about your artillery getting sniped, which may induce a little bit more haste in its use, but as it stands, I feel as though the defenders can get away with being a little bit more patient here. The attackers as well have eased off a little bit. Now all of the archers not going after one another. It's not too surprising. I mean, if the attackers are not using their Harad archers to shoot, then as the defenders you shouldn't be using your ammunition on them. And we do actually have the first melee engagement over here. Canned, without really too many options. I mean, they have to get involved in melee very quickly if they want to start the attack over here. Combination of Nomadic Warriors and Nearad Footmen. The Nomadic Warriors, the entry level, more numbers focused unit of line infantry. Individually they will be easy prey for the dwarves, but the Nearad Footmen will actually trade quite nicely with the dwarves, especially the spears, who are not going to be capable of doing as much damage in return, so more swings of those armor-piercing clubs are going to find their way into the dwarven soldiers. Mindful axe throwers doing their thing, so range support coming from both sides, although the axe throwers will be the more deadly of the 2 units being utilised for this purpose. Further back, Rhune's still slowly making their way up the hill, although they're having to deal with the harassment of the Horse Lords of Ulmo now, who are being used quite nicely actually, nice and aggressive from her 2 Mihai, and exposed Eastron Warriors, again maybe not the strongest of units the Horse Lords of Ulmo are going after, but these are free kills, and trying to shave away at the huge numbers advantage that the attackers have in these situations is going to be very important for the defenders' chances in this battle moving forward. So there are melee engagements now cropping up in multiple areas, 4 Lindon Pikes and Ironfoot Warriors facing off against the first wave, which is being headed up primarily by Mordor and their more basic units, Orc Fodder and Orc Maulers. I mean, if the Ironfoot Warriors are not careful, they have kind of overextended themselves a little bit away from the Elven Pikes, and especially with Trolls coming in and all the armour piercing from the low tier Orcs, the Warriors won't do so well, and while the Pikes are moving forward, It coincides with the Trolls' arrival, and the Trolls will also be good against the pikes that Lindon are providing to this front line, so need to be a bit careful here, the defenders. They don't take too many engagements like that, because that's the last thing that they're going to want the anchoring units of polearms that they have on display to be being lost to. Or javelins are moving forward. Belagire archers offering their support, so arrows are going to be flying back and forth. Very difficult to keep track of that now. All sorts of almost trying to charge in. Not the worst idea, but your own men are in the way, so it's going to be difficult to pull that off. And a lot of the units over here are going to be pretty good against cavalry and melee, even the two-handed axeman that the orcs have here. This is a good committal of a unit though. I like the Axeguard of Erebor edition. It's going to make life for the Olag High significantly less comfortable, and indeed all of the orcs that are around the Trolls are also not going to enjoy being introduced to heavy dwarven steel. Over here, Cand also having some joy, because it doesn't look as though any reinforcements are forthcoming for these Ironfoot spears, and you can see the sides of these dwarven units now being exposed a little bit, the armour piercing from the front, having the desired effect for now. More reinforcements can always be committed forwards, but I don't know what the long-term plan of the defenders is. Maybe they intend to pull back fairly quickly, try and do some more surgical strikes with ranged units and use their cavalry. I mean, I am a little bit surprised, honestly, that Sankat has not got a unit of Gamp Brim forward. The archers are not in range, and the Gamp Brim alone on the front would be enough to prevent the Horsewords of Ulmo from doing this. Not only are they killing off more of the Eastron warriors, but also some Variag mercenaries in for the bargain as well. They'll turn around and try and shoot at the Horsewords of Ulmo as they leave. Even the Eastron Guard actually are an anti-cavalry unit. They wouldn't do so well on the recharge, but it would at least give the Horsewords of Ulmo, now they're damaged, a little bit of pause. Some Ironfoot axe throwers, now out of ammunition presumably, are the ones to reinforce this front line. Maybe not the level of reinforcements the spears would have been hoping for, but it will at least maintain this front line for the foreseeable. The main event, however, certainly on the main road through the Saffrons over here. Some around on guard also. The Muhards of Harad now starting to pick up more of the slack. Polearms will be very useful in this sort of situation. Gondor archers, maybe more of a token effort from the Gondorians here to reinforce this front line, but it's better than nothing. And the Orc fodder says victory seems certain for the attacking forces that are over here. Axeguard of Erebor are actually shaken, which is kind of surprising, but it might have something to do with the fire arrows. Need to be a little bit careful then. They want to try and break the attackers. They are more likely to be broken, but you don't want to end up routing your own men as a result. Gondor and Erebor are reasonably stout in terms of their morale, but they're by no means unbreakable. Olag High coming back in. I do like the fact that more recently we've seen people use their trolls in melee in stages, rather than just leaving them in melee, which is where they will take the most damage. They've been used more wisely. Gondor archers are now broken, so yeah, this front line is actually on the verge of collapse already, and maybe a little bit later than would have been ideal for the commitment of these reinforcements. They don't have a choice, because they're not ready to retreat yet, the defenders. They've got too many of their assets still locked up over there. It would be a real disaster for them if this front line was to completely collapse, and maybe the green light for the attackers to continue to push forward aggressively here. Moran on halberds now joining the front, so no sign of the numbers starting to dwindle yet for the attackers. And so far, there's still plenty of arrow fire being traded back and forth. Haradrim archers, those orc javelins very damaged. Plenty of these units, more Haradrim spearmen being committed forward as well, just getting more numbers on the front line to try and keep up the pressure, which is important because as much as things are going quite well for the attackers here, a trebuchet like that is exactly the sort of thing which can turn things around very quickly. And now that the defenders have been forced to commit forward more units to keep this front line intact, things could turn against the attackers very quickly, so more units being committed forward very necessary. And the attackers have got nothing but manpower to burn at this stage in Siege anyway. Ravenhelm's being moved forward, getting hit by some manner of projectile. Olag High is still in here, but they're not going to last too much longer. Only 4 of them remain. They've managed to break at least what's left of some of the pikes there, but with Axeguard of Erebor, Ravenhelms, and kind of a charge from the Horsewords of Ulmo, yeah, 2 of them fall. Not too surprising that, so they've managed to salvage the situation somewhat. They're getting hit by Rangers. Those are clear projectiles from somewhere, I believe. Yeah, Castleman's Rangers are firing away, so that could be dangerous. I mean, the Ravenhelm's taking some not insubstantial hits from that. Meanwhile, still no more reinforcements being committed over here. A lot of the Nurad starting to fall away, but Nomadic Axemen being committed forwards as well. An entry-level unit of Axemen, not unlike the Orc Maulers. They will be, again, efficient against the Dwarves. It's these sort of decisions that may very well end up making a difference in the long run here. Can haven't really committed forward anything super important for them yet, and Leech can afford to continue as he has done for the time being. It's a little bit more of a difficult choice for the attackers here in the middle, because this is where the battle is centred for now. I'm a little bit surprised that Rhun are still loitering around, really, because they do need to think about moving forward, pressurising the defenders from the back here as well. Because if they don't, more and more resources will be able to be sent to this front line over here, which in the long run means Rhun will have a better opportunity, but it also means they're not going to have much in the way of allies left to help them close the game out, so keeping pressure on himself perhaps is Sanket. Not that the attackers over here are on their last legs just yet. Arrows zipping overhead. Ravenhelms will do fantastically in melee against Moranon units, of course, even after the slight savaging they received at the hands of the Umbar Rangers. Dismounted Serpent Guard will prove to be a slightly more worthy foe for them, though. And this front line is still looking, yeah, and you can see Moranon Guard now moving forward. They may be a basic unit of Orc Spears only, but with the front line exposed in this manner, already they're shaken though under a charge from the all sorts of Ulmo, but they'll be hoping to get their spears in and amongst the Lindon cavalry and prevent their retreat. Yeah, several of the riders falling there, not a bad move from the Dexter at all. Ironfoot Warriors will intercept the Moranon Guard and surely finish them off, but that gap in the front line still remains. They don't have too many infantry units extremely close by to take full advantage of that. Units being committed forward to the front line now as well. Citadel Guard. I feel as though plans have been changing from the defenders. I feel as though they were trying to get away with a minimalist approach to their front line over here, and they've been hoping to return to that, so they have the option of retreating, but more and more they've been having to commit more resources forward because of the setup over there. They wouldn't be able to retreat to the intended final stand on this map if they allowed this front line to collapse right now, which has led to more units being committed to this front line, I think, than they would have wanted, but the attacks have been able to take advantage maybe of them dragging their heels a bit by continually finding gaps. It hasn't been decisive yet, but all it takes is one for things to go south. The addition of the Nurad Halberds to this front line has led to the Dwarven front line very rapidly coming undone. Lots of arm piercing here. I mean, they're sending the Highborns of Erebor in, but they're going to need more than just one unit of bodyguard tier stuff at this stage, otherwise the pole arms are simply going to hold them at arm's length and the numbers will wash over them. Another questionable decision, I would suggest. And are Rhun on their way forward? They're getting closer. Are they going to try and skirmish with their foe? Ariag mercenaries are there. They may as well. I mean, they can hit the Ironfoot crossbows and put the decision in the dwarves' hands whether they want to waste crossbow bolts on a unit of basic archers whose job it is to absorb damage, really. This front line, the defenders, still slated as winning this, but now we're starting to see stuff like Alcarondas Legion come forward. A slightly more heavy-duty foe for them to have to try and work their way through. Minas Morgul's chosen. Of course, our blackguards are still present. The Moranon infantry is still sat on warband as well. I mean, they have plenty of units they can send forward. The slight worry, perhaps, is the fact that reinforcements are mostly all the way back there, and it's quite a long way to travel through arrow fire at that before they can get to the front line, which will be what the defenders hope allows them to hold on to this defensive position. But Alcarondas Legion and Minas Morgul chosen are a different matter from what they were fighting earlier, so more of a level playing field when it comes to quality. Some new cards in there as well. Routing from both sides, really, we've been seeing throughout this battle so far, but it's the sort of thing the attackers can afford far more of than the defenders. Northern Guard being sent forward. I think I can see Nazgul in there, unless that is purely the general model. No, there's more than one. So the Nazgul are at the heart of these defensive positions as well. That's a big rout, actually. 100 morale on infantry. Basic though they may be, that's a lot of numbers the attacks have just lost. So a good hit there from the Trebuchet, which is in a fantastic position, managing to relocate itself along the front line. Defeat is almost a certainty. Northern Guard, you know, things are dire when that tooltip pops up. More or less, so Mordor still have basic units that they can commit to the fight. Rhun's still just biding their time. I mean, this does mean that Rhun are going to be completely healthy in the late game, but it's going to be at the detriment of their allies, so we'll see if that works out in their favour. Highborns of Erebor largely, well, yeah, no, they are still just completely alone on this front line, although those narrow halberds have been absolutely savaged by those iron foot axe throws in behind. So without the halberds, the Highborns will do fantastically against the mostly low-end units that Can have on the front line now. Nomadic Warriors arriving will not be enough to tip the balance in Can's favour either, so Leech all of a sudden has got a decision to make. Is he going to send forward another unit of Poland, maybe a unit of Brotherhood of the Axe or something to give the numbers a little bit of bite as well, enough to crack through the dwarven exterior? Flaming shots being utilised. And the problem is, as the front line becomes more and more Umbar centric, morale shocks are going to become less and less effective. Ithlond Marines. Javelins being flung over her. Still defeat seems certain for these Northern Guard, even though they are in fairly good health. All sorts of Ulmo are still doing their thing. They've been a constant fixture in this battle. We've seen them buzzing around, doing what damage they can. I don't know whether I've seen them get enough kills on enough high-end units to have been worth their cost yet. That's always the problem with cavalry. You need to work very hard as the defenders in a 5v3 to make them worthwhile, which they can very well be. They can be match winners, but if you don't use them well enough, you've essentially sacrificed what could have been a very high-end unit of infantry for something which hasn't pulled its weight as much as you would like. Nomadic footmen now on the front line as well. Their big shields will be somewhat effective against the throwing axes that are being deployed to devastating effect against the men of the east here. Rhun are steadily starting to get into range. The Ironfoot crossbow is still not interested in shooting any of these units just yet, and you can understand why. The Flagrim are the best unit that are here, and while they remain out of melee, Rhun do blob up. Now I would imagine Darth probably would start using the crossbows to do good damage, but for now there's no real point. But Rhun are threatening to commence their assault as well, which now that the defenders have been suitably weakened, maybe now is the best time. Roman infantry moving forward, reinforcing the front line. And the defenders actually have managed to turn this fight around once again, so a little bit more quality necessary perhaps on the front line for the attackers. The Nazgul are presumably still alive in there to some extent or another, but the rest of the units around them not quite so scary. Blackguard of Barad-dûr on the way forward. I mean, that's all well and good as long as they have units that can potentially follow them in. A bit of javelin action to soften the enemy up first. Mordor chosen a loitering. Yeah, they don't really have the infantry on hand ready to consolidate any gains that the Blackguard may make by pushing through here. I'm not sure whether this is going to yield the results they want. Trebuchet doing its thing. These stunts, I don't really know if the angle is suitable for them, and also things are going to get a little bit chaotic as their own units start to intermingle with the front line. Blackguard are pushing forward, they're taking a lot of damage while doing so, so there is certainly a limit to what they can take. They're already shaken as well, pushing in there with plenty of javelin fire hitting them as well from the Pelagian Marines. Managed to stabilise their morale. The Balakith Axeguard are in here, through numbers they'll be fine. I mean, their armor piercing isn't going to be terribly useful against the Lindon fighters that remain. Axguard of Erebor still hanging around. Over here, Iron for Axe Throwers also on the march, reinforcing what extremely little remains perhaps of the Highborns of Erebor. So the dwarves still holding on over here, but can have got much more left to give, and the dwarves are having to divide their attention, so surely the defenders are at least thinking about pulling back at this point. Rhun have also begun their attack. Eldrin Blade Masters have been committed as well, though Ironfoot crossbows are going to be shooting away. Eastern Warriors, Scion Rim, Flag Rim, all good units, but when they're under crossbow fire and having to tangle with the very best that Lindon have to offer, it's probably not going to end all that well for them, and indeed the lowliest of their units are routing off now. Maybe not the best start to the fight that Rhun was hoping for, but they still have so much of their manpower to burn. I don't think they should be too concerned about the initial engagement. The numbers still very much in their favour. Iron for Axe Throwers fighting evenly with the Nurads, but again can simply commit more reinforcements forwards when necessary. Defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. Is that a fact? Blackguard of Barad-dûr running for the hills. Pelagia. I mean, they make a half-decent melee combatant, but it's certainly not something they'll be hoping to face some of the stronger units the attackers have to offer. Stelgard on the way, getting some good hits down the line there. The Union Rangers as well, so it's been a very, in spite of the fact that it's been a single line fight, it's been one of the messiest examples of a single line fight you could hope to see. I mean, there's been a real ebb and flow to it. I don't know who's going to be most happy with this. I mean, the Warlords of Umbar have got a good opportunity maybe as the battlefield thins out a little bit in terms of the units that remain. They're going to have a good opportunity to charge into the soft, vulnerable underbelly of the defending armies. I don't know, I mean, I always give the edge to the attackers in this sort of situation simply because they can afford more losses. And the defenders have certainly been taking losses as well, so it's not quite so cut and dry, and it's more difficult as well for the defenders on flat ground like this to make full use of their skirmishers, which is always hard to really keep tabs on how that situation is developing, but we'll wait and see. Axguard of Erebor moving in, there's also crossbows that can be sent forward, Pelagia Marines facing off against Belagair archers in melee. Trebuchet presumably still has a bit of ammunition, but they are running somewhat low on time before their ground will be compromised. Balkoth tribesmen moving forward into melee, but Noldrin Blade Masters and fully upgraded veterans of Osgiliath will send them packing pretty quickly. Some Carmel's Shadow Guard moving in here as well. I mean, armor piercing is all well and good, but Lindon seem to be taking a little bit more of the lead over here, and even with Gondor, their pikes should be enough to keep those wicked halberds at bay. Flaming shots from the Nar Rim coming in, but even the Noldrin Blade Masters are well armoured over here, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult for Rhun to deal damage at the pace they would have been hoping for. And Marines. Up the slack from where the axe throwers have been so effective over here so far, and Brotherhood of the Spear are a worthy target for them to single out. Further back over here, Axguard of Erebor defeat seems certain for them. Another wave of attackers coming forward. Minas Morgul Chosen, Dismounted Serpent Guard, the Balakith and Ardnaian units from Umbar. So once again the defenders find themselves under the cosh. Also our Blackguards. It's a crossbowman. They still have ammunition. There's not really a great deal of defending ranged units left to oppose them, to be honest, which is the main reason why you'd keep them back until this point. Temple Guard is still there. There's still some strong units from Umbar and Harad as well, so I don't know. I mean, the defenders are doing a good job, really, of holding their positions, but it's costing them a lot in the long run. It's going to make retreating to further back in the settlement a little bit more difficult than maybe they would like. More Alcarondas Legion arriving on the front line as well. Athenian Rangers still looking menacing though. Artillery and Ranger fire, the sort of thing which can certainly still turn this around. Mithlon Marines getting into melee now, but Brotherhood of the Spear probably not weak enough from the javelins to allow the Mithlon Marines to actually claim the upper hand in this fight. Plenty of lower end Candish units also backing them up, whereas the Mithlon Marines don't have much in the way of dwarven support anymore. 5 routing Harland Guard, they've still got some high end units nearby. Wardens of Elos, Tyrion banking their shots. How are Rhun getting on? Rhun have managed to push back a little bit more, but the Flagrum routing in the face of the waiting Noldorin Guard. So again, they found a gap, the attackers, but the defenders were willing to send forward their units to close that gap pretty quickly. Noldorin Blade Masters still here. Fountain Guard have been committed to the front line. Interestingly, not many of them seem to be attacking as such. Rarely have I seen the Carmel's Shadow Guard actually use the poking animation of the halberd. They usually wield it more like an axe. Noldorin Guard are there. Now the Fountain Guard are going to commit themselves. Now that the Flagrum have arrived, the combination of Noldorin Elves and Fountain Guard from Gondor is a devastating combination, but Rhun more eager perhaps to keep this assault going now. They've got Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen throwing projectiles. Carmel's Chosen have arrived to give a unit of high quality at the centre of these efforts, but I don't think Rhun are going to get very far, but they are at least siphoning off potential strength from elsewhere. I mean, you can see this front line is, I don't want to get too close to that actually, because the frame rates are pretty appalling with Ranger ammunition being traded back and forth. Victory seems certain for the attackers still, but it's getting to be quite thin on the ground for both sides there. The Marines are actually fighting the Candish forces to a standstill so far, which is kind of impressive, but then they are intended to be a unit that can pull their weight in melee. Obsidian Guard. Variag mercenaries firing their missiles. Crossbows. Still with a bit of ammunition. This is the sort of thing that could prove to be very important come the late game. Nara and Erebor Guard, very difficult for enemy archers to skirmish with them, but maybe less so for crossbows. Punching right through that dark Numenorian plate armour that they wear. Could be an important factor. There's still some more javelins left alive here. They're very difficult to spot from far away though when they're in and amongst all the corpses. That was kind of unfortunate actually. Very close to hitting centre mass of the Serpent's Fangs. A little bit better, but still more of a glancing blow than anything. Pelargia Marine's doing quite well. As soon as I say that, of course, they break, but they've been fighting for a while, considering it's not really their calling in life to get involved in the melee fight quite like that. They've done okay for themselves. What's going on over there? Mithrandir's retinue getting in and amongst the runic ranks. I'm not quite sure how they found themselves in the middle of the runic army, but here they are, pushing their way through Rhun. Mithrandir's retinue, opportunity perhaps to go after the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, and they're causing havoc in the runic ranks in behind. I don't know how long they can keep that up for, but still. And as much as Sanket held back for a while in this fight, he's pushed forward now, and it's weird that the defence over here has been so strong against him, so I don't know how much more of this he can take, but considering the kind of area he had to attack, he didn't have the luxury of a slow burn assault like Cam had been able to employ, and so the defenders have hammered him pretty heavily here. Lots of high quality units being utilised for Lindon Marines. What's going on here? Nurad footmen pushing through, and maybe a result of trying to be a little bit frugal on this front line against Khand is finally starting to bite the defenders a little bit, with Nurad footmen now filtering through the front line. They may rout now that the Obsidian Guard are here, but if they don't, That's a real problem because they've managed to get all the way through to the trebuchet. If they can kill off the trebuchet crew, that's a huge asset that has just been lost. And to be honest, with Corsair crossbows arriving from the other side now for Gondor's Legion, I think it's kind of a moot point. I think the artillery is going to be lost anyway, so maybe waiting a little bit too long to use the rest of the ammunition in the trebuchets. Assuming they still had ammunition, but I think they did. I don't think we saw the trebuchet fire enough to account for all of its ammo. Warlords of Umbar on their way forth. Erebor legionaries. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. They're a very strong unit, but that's a lot of axes they're having to deal with as well. I mean, this is where the defenders will be tested most harshly. Because all of a sudden there's a number of angles in which they're exposed, and the attackers can hunt down stuff like Athelian Rangers. I mean, the Warlords of Umbar running roughshod all over the back lines, hunting down the Rangers, the Black Hawk Engineers, the Warlords of Elos Tyrion, all of these units. And Aldrin Blade Masters, I mean, I do think that maybe Ellipsis is making a little bit of an error here. I mean, he's going after the Blade Masters, which is fine, but I think flattening the Wardens of Elos Tyrion, the Athelian Rangers first and foremost would be the best move. The Black Hawk Engineers maybe a bit more able to withstand a charge because of that second hit point of theirs. This is going to be fairly nasty though. The use of this Umbar cavalry could prove to be very, very important. Mithranda's retinue is trying to hunt them down, but they're not going to do that well against them. We saw the Black Hawk Engineers actually shooting at the Candish forces over here. Obsidian Guard locking things down now on this front line. I mean, to be fair, the way that the Mithranda's retinue have been getting in the way, really, of the Warlords has actually been very, very useful. The Wardens of Minas Ithil also shooting at them, so the window for the Warlords of Umbar to actually be that devastating force has kind of closed. The reformation of this front line over here, I mean, the attackers have certainly pushed the defenders back at this point, but the defenders have managed to set up a new front line. Marksmen of Caer Andros, Erebor legionaries, units that are good enough in melee that the attackers can't simply assume victory anymore. I think we've also kind of seen the opportunity for the defenders to pull back to this section of the city if they wanted to close. They can't really do that anymore, because if they do, they'll have to leave behind so much of their armies that it'll effectively be throwing the game. So they're going to have to meet the bull by the horns, take the bull by the horns. Temple Guard moving forward, more armour piercing. Projectiles being used, which is a real fixture in this late game here. Crossbows from both sides. Wardens of Minas Ithil, now the Temple Guard. Obsidian Guard, still victory seems certain for them. Dual wield unit versus dual wield unit with the Brotherhood of the Sword moving forward, but the Obsidian Guard are the superior combatants in this case. Have we over here? Northern Guard. Still fighting hard alongside the Fountain Guard, but numbers are starting to favour the Easterlings more and more. There goes the Harad general. Harad certainly the kind of faction where when their general dies, they can lose their bottle a little bit, but considering it's champions of Nafra and Trollman, which are making up the vast majority on this front line, that's actually very important as well. They managed to mount the trebuchet and now trying to shoot into this front line over here, killing off more of these very dangerous units of Trollman will prove to be important. I think the frame rate's struggling a little bit, but then it has had a history of doing such on this map in the past, in the distant past, in less stable versions of the game, shall we say. That was a nice hit from the trebuchet as well. Dragon Slayers moving in, the Obsidian Guard getting swamped. Every now and then Kanda move forward with real purpose and push the defenders back. The defenders, to their credit, have been able, on every one of those occasions really, to salvage the situation. Dragon Slayers now moving in. Also the projectiles ripping through Kanda over there are indeed the Black Locks. It's going to be very painful for the Wardens of Elos Tyrion. Also over here, Sons of Durin making their way across. Athelian Rangers, there may only be 15 of them, but that's still enough to do a lot of damage over the long haul. Demons of the Desert are moving forward. Temple Guard, I mean, There's a lot of... This is going to be a battle that is really going to be defined here in the late game by the projectiles. You can see there Demons of the Desert ripping their way through some of the stronger Gondorian infantry. But Rangers, Demons, Temple Guard, all of this... This is going to be how the battle is really won or lost, and it's hard to keep track of all of that. Once minutes I feel are bloodied, it looks like they've used up all their ammunition, which, considering how much of it had to be used on those warlords, even though the warlords weren't maybe as devastating damage-wise as they could have been, that alone is a useful factor, which is only really noted after the fact. Wards of the White Tower taking a lot of arrow fire. They won't mind too much given their heavy armour, multiple HP and shields, but still 3 damage that Rhun are essentially doing here. High quality nature of the Lindon heavy swordsman re-added to the front line, and that is enough to continue to fight Rhun to a standstill. Further back over here, Dragon Slayers, the armour piercing will actually be somewhat useful against the Nurats, not as much as it would be against other factions, but still. Forward come the Brotherhood of the Axe as well. More armour piercing being added by both sides, although Sons of Durin, as good as the Brotherhood of the Axe are, they are not on the Sons of Durin's level. Still kind of being canned, are running out of units at this point. So are the defenders. Surrey and McCallan. Pointing out the obvious there. Marshal and Carandros really proving their worth in melee in this fight as well. Of course, their blackguards firing their javelins. There goes the Runic general. So far 2 attacking generals, the only ones to fall. Warns Velos, Tyrion, Temple Guard actually broken, being sent in to maybe try and silence the catapult, but too many units around here. Of course, our Blackguards now trying to finish off the Warns Velos, Tyrion, but out of ammo as they are, they're just going to be committed into melee to silence the javelins. I think 45 of them, 20 here, so the Warlords will win that fight because of the numbers discrepancy. Out of ammo crossbows, Mithrandir's retinue still buzzing around the place. I don't know, I think the defenders have done very well up until this point, considering the kind of like organised chaos this battle in many ways. From both sides, Corsair crossbows going to get engaged by Gondor cavalry and Dwarven crossbows. Marksman Carandros still fighting hard on the front line, so I think they don't really have much else left, do they, the attackers over here, so they are going to be mopped up. Canned as well, like I already said, kind of scraping the barrel. Black Blocks now being committed to the front line as well. They're going to have to fight their way through Gondorian and Dwarven bodyguard tier units. Hard to do. Stormguard are very strong, with all the support around them maybe it's possible, but it's going to be difficult. Rhun also running low, so it's coming down to the wire here, because the defenders don't really have much they can commit to any of these fights now either. So it may come down to little things, like the Narim still having ammunition and actually providing support to this Runic front line. On closer inspection, this Runic front line is so thoroughly outclassed. Heard the trebuchet in the distance there, we'll go and see what damage that did, but Guildsmen really the only thing that can go toe-to-toe with the level of Gondorian and Lindon troops they're going up against. Variad mercenaries are fine, they're functional, but you need more than functional at this point in time. Looking like it maybe got a little bit of friendly fire, which is most unfortunate there, but that's the risk you take with a trebuchet. Black Blocks actually pulling themselves off the front line perhaps. I mean, it got some friendly fire, but it got a lot of the Candish forces as well. At this point in time, I don't know whether that's the trade you should be taking. Under normal circumstances for the defenders in a 5v3, trading is certainly not what you want to be doing. You don't have enough to trade with. But now, maybe they could. If it's enough to get rid of these Corsair crossbows and kiting the Ironfoot crossbows back. Kiting with crossbows is ordinarily not something you would see either, but this isn't really an ordinary kind of fight. Where is a star over here? Is this... Okay, so yeah, the Mordor general was in the Temple Guard, and Lightning Marines also routing, so nothing left over here. The Corsair crossbows are the only thing that are now not embroiled in the fighting taking place in the main square of MISTRAND, I guess you'd call it. They have managed to engage them in melee, but there's not many of them left. The Founders' rest will be continued. Yeah, so when the announcer says that the battle is going in favour of the defenders all of a sudden, you know that the situation is developing in a rather poor way for the attackers, although Cam are doing quite well here. Strength of their halberds and storm guard doing a good job here at forcing even some of the best of the Dwarven and Gondorian infantry to falter. Variag mercenaries, I mean, they're trying to go after the archers to still have ammunition. Variag mercenaries will almost certainly rout as a result of this forward momentum they now have. Yeah, broken and fighting to the death. The Narum are going to try and run for the hills, but it's kind of unimportant at this point. You don't have, if this was a situation where your allies were, maybe you could say Kandar, one of the last remaining guildsmen does manage to slay the Gondorian general, so that's something. Again, the kind of Gondorian units that are left though are not going to be the kind that will rout easily even with the loss of the general, so I don't know how big of a factor that will actually prove to be. Southron Warhorn blares out. Horns of Alostirian are still fighting. Marksman Command Boss now victorious over here. The frame rate doesn't enjoy the sheer amount of bodies there. Erebor guards still alive, and 15 of them. It's not insubstantial considering the margins by which we're working to. Also crossbows, I mean, this is, again, archers running away and crossbows running away isn't really the end of the battle that you'd want to see. But Kandar here, still representing in melee. And also when the announcer is saying things like that, as the attackers, sometimes you just gotta accept the fact of the situation. And as the attackers, the onus is on you, as ever. The Horns of Minnesothiel maybe are a faster unit as well. They're going to cut their way through what remains of these Narim over here. They are a multiple HP unit after all. I mean, their expertise is certainly not as a melee fighter, but better than nothing. Narim trying to run. Point blank shots from the flaming shots, however, will probably finish off those Horns of Minnesothiel, but they'll take a few Narim with them. And actually do have the momentum over here, amusingly enough. There's still some Noldor and Blade Masses remaining. Risky, but that has actually paid off because they hit centre mass into the Gandish forces there. There goes the Umbar general. And with that, with the Storm Guard having no support, I mean, any chance Can may have had in melee is going up in smoke, quite literally. There's simply too many strong units remaining as well for them to fight straight up like that anyway, I think. Valastirian still waiting for the Corsair crossbows maybe to return. 3 Mithlon Marines are going to get easily dealt with by them. It's going to be clean up now, so yeah, percentage of allies, it's very close, this battle, in terms of percentages, you have to say. The slightest thing would have been enough to turn this battle on its head. But in the end, no. How the Runs of Minnesothiel are getting on? I mean, they're continuing to do very well in melee, as you would expect, but yeah, now though they're going to get surrounded by the Narum and killed, but still, a few of these Narum dealt with, and it will make the job of the main army killing them off later a little bit easier. And I hope that he doesn't try to kite constantly, because there's no real purpose in doing that at this stage, but considering the amount of frames left, I don't think the attacks are going to indulge in that kind of behaviour too much. Horns of the White Tower joining the Noldor Blade Mass has proven to be quite an effective combination in this battle. The Storm Guard is such a strong unit. Now holding down the fort for Can on this battle, all on their own after that rather fortuitous trebuchet hit. If that had hit their own men, that could have been a real disaster. Blacklock Engineers, yeah, they're going after them now. Going after the Narn Erebor Guard, may as well fling some more flaming boulders and rotting meat. So that's finally the end of the trebuchet ammunition. A very equal parts fortunate and good play, I think, that they were able to get their trebuchet back online. So often, if the attackers, well, we'll talk about that in the splash screen, but this battle has been one that's been on a knife's edge, really, going either way several times. Narn Erebor Guard and Corsair Crossbowmen, surrounded by rotting meat. I mean, the Corsair crossbows, not the stoutest of heart in terms of a fighting unit. Dirty-faced pirates wielding makeshift crossbows, funnily enough, not interested in fighting to the death for the honour of their cause, and they are shaken. Blacklock Engineers moving forward in the attempt to finally finish them off in this battle. A less glorious final stand from them than perhaps from the Storm Guard over here. There are levels to this. One's the White Tower actually now turning around and going after the Rhun, who are probably out of ammunition, so they're just going to get involved in melee and see what they can do against a unit as tough as the Wardens, though the answer is going to be not much. Very close indeed. 1% now is what's in it. Elder and Blade Masters, 15 of them versus 4 Storm Guard. 1 player has admitted defeat. That would be, I believe, Rhun. So I don't think those Rhun would have routed all on their own. Not Umbar though. Umbar will probably be the last left standing. Yeah, because there's 3 Storm Guard left. I mean, it really just depends on how strong the Storm Guard are and how much punishment they can take from the remaining Blade Masters. One remains. Taking a good amount of damage, isn't he? Not really able to get any hits off himself. He tried to there, but got parried. And there he goes. So yeah, it will be Umbar, the last ones.
Behold how our cowardly foe runs. It's time to
That's harsh on Canned. Narn Erebor Guard still in and amongst things over here. Blacklock Engineers fighting evenly so far, although they're going to Corsair Crossbowmen now routing, so that will leave the Narn Erebor Guard to face this threat alone, and that will be the end of that. 2% in it in the end. Sounds about right. Difficult battle to quantify this. I mean, I don't think there was no poor play really. Macro decisions that you could make differently, but it may not have made much of a difference in the long run. There's only one thing I would point out from the attackers in terms of how they could have turned this battle around, and that is on this main road. They had several times where they were pushing through the defences and finding gaps. If they had more infantry units on hand to really consolidate those gains, I don't think the defenders would have recovered from that. The counterpoint to that is, of course, they would have been in full view of artillery and crossbow bolts and javelins and arrows. But the point remains, if they had a little bit more in terms of infantry on hand to take advantage of those gaps, I do think the defenders probably would have fallen away. But as it is, not quite enough, and the defenders managing to stand firm, which, considering this was a battle in which the defenders didn't really retreat as such, they picked their defensive positions, and then I don't know whether that was the initial plan given the rather light nature of the initial front lines, but if it wasn't, they pivoted to this strategy very nicely. So yeah, let's see what did the damage for the Gondorians on this occasion. So Athelian Rangers 341 kills, which is, I'd say, an acceptable amount for Rangers. I mean, it's the highest kill count Gondor have, but Rangers are so important to the meta of the game in this version of it that it's not that surprising to see them get like 500 on upwards. 341 though, enough to really be useful. Like I said, in this kind of battle when the terrain is a little bit flatter, archers are not going to be quite so devastating as they can be. Gondor archers doing nicely. Marshal Carandros less kills than I thought, actually, given the fact that they were firing away from range and then doing quite well in melee by the looks of things. One of the stalwarts of the later game front lines were the marksmen, as they are intended to be. Fountain Guard, Nimlothian Honour Guard, Pelagian Marines getting 104 kills as well. Later on, when things got a little bit thin on the ground for both sides, was when the elite units started to pop up, so it's not too surprising perhaps they didn't get as many kills. MISTRAND is retinue doing well. The trebuchet as well, 312 kills, so very good use of the trebuchet. Looked like they weren't going to be able to use it for the latter portion of the battle, but able to salvage that situation as well. And all of that is why I think the defenders were definitely worthwhile victors here. Worthy victors, I should say, not worthwhile. But yes, I would say so. So a big thank you to Winged Swordsman 44 for sending this one in to me. Sent me a few others as well, which we will be getting to in the days and weeks to come. Like I said, this is the first battle I'm recording since returning from another trip away for work. And I actually think I'm going to be able to maintain my schedule, weirdly enough. So I don't think there is going to be a gap, which is good. But yeah, I mean, it's been a bit of a weird time, and we're getting to the sharp end of the year now. I've been kind of saying over the past few months that things are going to be changing towards the end of the year, and it's certainly been an eventful year where the main events, still haven't happened yet for me. So that's part of the reason why I've been significantly less active in the comment sections on the videos than I would have liked to have been over the past couple of months, because there's been so much going on that even just maintaining the channel to the extent that I've been able to do so has been something I thought was unlikely up until this point. So the fact that it's been able to happen this way has been a little bit of a boost, a little bit of a silver lining perhaps to the cloud. But like I said, hopefully as we move into the very final moments of 2022 and into 2023, the channel can be extrapolated out a little bit again, and we can start to look at seeing what 2023 can bring for the channel, and based upon what happens then, will kind of determine how things go forward just generally. Because as it stands, like I said, 2024 is going to be where things get busy for me once again, hopefully in a far more positive way than they are at the moment. I mean, that's far enough in the future that I can't really plan for that anyway. There's planning long term in great detail is something that's very difficult to do. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be important decisions to be made in the long term, but in the mid-term and even in the short term now, that hopefully the most busy period of the year I think is done. I mean, there is still a chance maybe that I get called away for one last 3-week trip before my intended departure from this company, but yeah, it's one of those where it's kind of hard because the situation throughout this entire year regarding my intended departure from the company has been shifting and changing almost constantly delayed as well, which has been a little bit of a shame for myself, but it is what it is. But that's part of the reason why I've been significantly less active in terms of communicating things up until this point in the year anyway. But hopefully, certainly into the autumn and definitely into the winter, that will not be the case, and things can start to take shape a little bit more so, and I'll be able to communicate that in a more timely fashion. But for now, we will continue and we will get back on schedule really. So there's going to be a few more Reforged videos coming up. I may do, depending upon the exact lay of the land on my upcoming time off, I may do a live stream. That's going to be a little bit more impromptu than anything if it does happen though. And it kind of depends on whether or not I'm going to get called away for 3 weeks again come the end of September into October, because if I am, then I need to use as much time as possible to build up the recordings once again so that I can survive in the same manner that I have done over the summer. But yes, irregardless of that, I'm done waffling. I've waffled enough in these splash screens throughout the course of these past few months, but I think this one was worth having once again, if only for my own sake. So yeah, big thank you to Winged Swordsman 44 once again for sending in this battle replay, and the others, which we will be seeing shortly. Big thanks to all the players for being a part of this battle replay. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.